Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of, I guess, a podcast called The Deep Dive, name pending. I don't know if I'm going to keep it that way, but we'll see. So I guess for my first episode, I want to talk about what this podcast is and what it is not. So first of all, I own a company called Tech Targets. This channel is not going to be necessarily 1000% tech-based. I spend most of my life in tech, so it's obviously going to bleed in there a lot. I might have some dedicated episodes that are just about tech, but it might be about personal stuff. It might be about politics a little bit. I'll dip my toe in there. It might be about just other things in life. It's really more about just me putting myself out there, people getting to know me, my personality a little bit better. Going to be falling on my face a few times. I'm going to hit some landmines here and there. Hopefully nothing bad enough to get canceled or anything like that before I even get going. But yeah, so this first episode is going to be about a blog post that I'm about to put out about how AI and testing, standardized testing in particular, are quietly hollowing out education, right? So there's a longtime software veteran that I'll call Carl. And he recently made a claim that kind of sounds hyperbolic until you follow the incentives all the way down, right? He said, quote, AI is on track to destroy schools and teachers and education and make a ton of money doing it if we don't stop it. And, a lot of people's minds immediately go to, obviously he's talking about children using AI to cheat on their homework and testing and stuff like that. But really what he's talking about is AI replacing teaching itself and reducing educators to kind of just babysitters while generative AI systems optimize children for test performance, right? And I'm looking off to the side here because I am reading off of some notes here, and this is a topic that's very kind of nuanced, and I don't want to mess anything up. Hopefully, as episodes go on, I'll get better at just kind of speaking towards the camera. But at least this first episode, I'm kind of relying heavily on my notes here. So getting back to the topic at hand here, the most uncomfortable part of this is that the education system is already perfectly designed to be taken over by AI and replacing teachers, basically. And so I want to talk more about that kind of trap that we kind of built ourselves. And this isn't really limited to the United States. It's kind of all over the world, right? So modern public education didn't really become test-centric by accident. Accountability frameworks redefined success, right? I'm going to be doing a lot of these air quotes, as measurable improvement on standardized tests, right? And that's it. But is that really a good metric for success? A lot of people would say no. And yes, I realize that was a Trumpism there. Don't kill me, whatever. It's a good rhetorical device at the very least. Anyway, so like I said, this is a problem worldwide with standardized tests. I mean, we're pretty bad about it in the United States as far as using it as a metric to gauge how children are doing. But I mean, South Korea is a lot worse. China's a lot worse. I mean, your entire life is, decided based upon one or more, standardized tests, and oftentimes a gamut of them. But anyway, so this kind of choice for defining success this way has big consequences, right? When success is defined narrowly and numerically, then optimization follows, right? And optimization is exactly what machines, computers, are best at. So generative AI doesn't need to understand children or the concept of wisdom, right? It only needs, number one, a repeatable scoring mechanism. Number two, rapid feedback. Number three, permission to experiment relentlessly. And these standardized testing regimes, it gives it all three, right? So on paper, right, AI might look like a quote unquote better teacher, right? Because it has the sum knowledge of the entire world for all of time. And so obviously it can become an expert in any given field relatively easily. But I'm going to go back to our software development veteran, Carl. He kind of made a chilling observation, right? He said that AI can actually be seen as a more effective teacher than any human if all you care about is test scores. And kind of my argument here, in Carl's argument, really is success should be defined as a lot more than just doing well on standardized tests. Right? I know, earth-shattering revelation, but just bear with me here. An AI tutor can generate infinite variations of standardized questions. It can test students continuously. It can adapt incentives until performance improves, right? It never gets tired. It never needs a smaller class size, and it never pushes back on administrators or principals. I would argue that this really isn't education. It's more kind of behavioral conditioning. But to be clear, right, the education system always included some level of behavioral conditioning. But really Carl's point, and kind of my point, I would agree with Carl on here, is that generative AI could kind of push things to like a dystopian extreme, right? Carl compares it to something called a Skinner box, which is like an experimental setup used to train animals through like rewards and punishments. And really, like a student at a desk with a screen and headphones and a camera can really kind of function as like a Skinner box, right? The AI can adapt to the particular student and then give punishments and rewards to effectively get them better and better at these standardized tests over time, even if it becomes a little bit inappropriate, right? So anyways, I'll come back to the inappropriate part in a little bit, but if test scores rise, the system is judged a success. So what I mean is the AI system is judged as a success as long as scores rise, regardless of whether students are learning, judgment or ethics or developing curiosity or just like persistence, right? Like, a big part of learning is, if you get discouraged or disheartened, you pick yourself back up and you keep going and you try again. If AI is just feeding you exactly what you need all the time, you kind of never have to deal with failure or bad feelings or getting upset, that kind of stuff. So anyway, now I want to focus more on the vendors developing these AI systems for education, right? So these AI vendors promise safety, right? Another air quotes, right? What does that mean? So they say, oh, we're going to have policies in place, different filters and other guardrails on our AI models, so that it won't go off the rails when it has like the full attention and focus of students, right? But the problem with AI is that over kind of long-term interactions, which is obviously going to be necessary in an education setting, it goes off the rails. Like you can't stop it, and it goes beyond just like hallucination stuff. Depending on how these models are trained, if the objective, well, let's put it this way, whatever the objective may be, in this case I'm talking about education, the objective of the AI model is by its very nature weighted more heavily than all the guardrails, because ultimately it's driving home towards that particular objective. So in this situation, whatever guardrails are in place, to protect the students, will ultimately fail given a large enough like time window, because the AI wants to hit its metrics. It wants to get to the objective, right? So over the weeks and months of tutoring, a system will learn what works for a particular student. If certain tones or like emotional nudges, or even, boundary violating, will, if those things correlate with higher engagement by the students and better scores on tests, then it's going to keep doing that over time, right? And it might be subtle at first, and it might just continue to be subtle, but it's going to be there, right? And then, these AI vendors might say, oh, we're going to add, empathy and ethics and other boundaries into these AI models, but ultimately, number one, that's kind of philosophically crazy, because how do you add like those concepts to something that's essentially like a language predictor? It doesn't really make sense philosophically speaking. But besides that, ultimately, the main objective of the model is going to win out, right? Anyway, so here's kind of the economic end game that no one really wants to say out loud, right? The pitch to school districts is going to be really simple. It's going to be like, hey, we're going to lower your costs. You're going to get higher scores, and it's going to be personalized instruction at scale, right? Sounds great. So, but here's the problem. Teachers are already constrained by ratios, funding, and burnout. And, they can't possibly compete on those terms that I just mentioned, right? Especially inside a broken measurement system where we define success as just higher test scores, right? So, and I'll come back to that again, right? So ultimately, my thesis here is going to be, we need to redefine what success means as far as educating children. But I'll get to that in a second. Maybe I should have put this at the top of the whole episode, but I'll get there. I really want to focus in on, though, if, we're defining success in this way as far as higher test scores, and the teachers start getting displaced by AI tutors, right? Once enough human expertise is displaced, then prices are going to rise. These school districts won't have any alternatives, essentially because they'll become dependent on these AI platforms, and they won't be able to hire back the human expertise that they let go. It'll become prohibitively expensive, right? The budgets adjust down until they can't anymore. And then the other big problem is these school districts just don't have the technical expertise to audit how these AI tutors are doing, right? They're going to have to rely on the vendors to give them some sort of report and say, oh yeah, no, it's doing great. Everything's working as expected. You're getting your money's worth. Yeah, everything's great. But is it really though? I'd rather have actual educators rather than tech bros weighing in on that, if that makes sense. So ultimately, AI is going to disrupt the educational system, right? But it's not a good disruption in the sense that, these tech companies mention, disrupting industries and as a good thing, a positive thing for the future of society. It's going to be disruption, yes, and they get to make a lot of money, yes, but then it's going to be industry capture. And this happens in other industries too, where once you start relying on certain tech, you can't ever go back. And that's a big concern of mine here. And so, yeah, to kind of build off of that, this kind of pattern of industry capture shows up in other areas where AI, it's starting to, I should say, it hasn't really gotten there yet, but it's starting to show up in other areas, like in the legal arena with bar exams, for software development with coding, riddles and games and trivia games and that kind of stuff. But I'll go back to Carl again and say, another good quote from him, life is not a simple multiple choice test where you're given practice questions in advance. Benchmark obsession rewards speed under perfect conditions, not responsibility under uncertainty, right? And responsibility under uncertainty is more of a microcosm of real life, right? So my point here is that this type of education through AI, is it really preparing anybody for the real world? I don't really think so. Right? It's kind of a big thing that's missing. Responsibility under uncertainty is important to understand and learn. It celebrates outputs while disregarding harms, bias, negligence, mental health damage, and ethical failures, right? And I can guarantee you, whatever reports educators are getting from these AI vendors about how well their particular tutoring system is doing, those dashboards and reports do not include any information about any of these potential harm areas. It's all going to be, puppies and rainbows and flowers and everything's great and everybody's just killing it on the standardized testing. So if we define intelligence as who wins the test, machines will always win, right? but that doesn't necessarily mean they should be in charge of teaching human beings. And I hope I'm really kind of getting that point across, right? And extrapolating this out beyond education a little bit, right? When education becomes an answer selection kind of process instead of sense making, we don't just lose teachers, we lose functional members of society when they grow up, right? If students are trained, to learn this way, to pick from pre-approved options, to trust authoritative outputs on screens, to avoid ambiguity rather than grapple with it, right? Outsourcing teaching to profit maximizing systems is going to concentrate power over childhood cognition inside corporate infrastructure, which is then becomes like invisible to parents and voters and everybody, right? And that's kind of alarming for everyone. It should be alarming to everyone, regardless of your like political, situation. So really, my point here is we need to redefine success in education differently, okay? Education should value curiosity, collaboration, ethical reasoning, and judgment under uncertainty, which again, I really like that concept because it's like what happens when you become an adult, right? You don't know when you go through life and you encounter certain situations or different, scenarios. You think you're making the right call, but you might not be, but you need to, move forward under that situation anyway. I'll just restate, if we define success as curiosity, collaboration, ethical reasoning, and judgment under uncertainty, then AI's advantage or perceived advantage collapses quickly. Perceived advantage of teaching children just collapses, right? Teaching is a relational craft. It's not a content delivery platform. If you reduce it to delivery, it becomes replaceable by the AI. If you defend it as human formation, right? Then it can't be automated away. So the path forward here, this podcast really isn't about banning AI in the education system. It's about refusing metric capture. And so that means, number one, demanding that assessments based on projects, writing, and reasoning, not just speed and recall, right? Number two, prohibiting advertising and sponsored content in instructional tools. I'm sure all of us can envision a future where when AI is given unfettered attention by, students and all their focus, maybe the math word problem isn't about like apples and oranges and like subtracting 5 from 10. It's like, a particular brand of, Monster energy drink, and then you subtract that from the case of soda. We don't want that in education, and you could tell it will definitely go that direction, right? So number 3, requiring independent audits and transcript reviews before and during any AI tutor deployment. Number 4, funding teachers. It's a no-brainer. I don't know why we can't just do this as a country. It's one of the most important areas to invest in. I don't understand why we're just unable to get this done, but I do understand why, but I don't want to get into the whole power dynamics of politics, but it's like such an easy win for the future of the world. Anyway, and then lastly, insisting on human in the loop oversight with real authority. Most of all, it means that our communities should be explicitly defining what education is for before these AI vendors do it for us. So that's the first episode of the Deep Dive podcast. I guess I'm going to stick with that. I don't know. We'll see. If you have suggestions, let me know. This is Paul DiMaggio. I'm wearing my Tech Targets shirt, but this podcast is not really affiliated with my company at all. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll just get better from here. Probably. All right.